I have been working with clay for, I think, 30 years. I took my first class in high school. One of the beauties of what I'm doing is that even though I've been doing this for 30 years, I'm still in some ways a total novice. There are so many things that I don't know that I could spend the next 30 years and, really concentrate on one. I could concentrate on wood firing for the next 30 years, or salt firing, or there are people who are sort of encyclopedic in their technical knowledge. I'm not one of those people. I'm somebody who learns something that I like as a technique, and then I try to push it as far as I possibly can with subtle changes, and try to sort of squeeze the most meaning out of it. Well, I think that I was trained as an architect, and I worked as an architect for several years. And in contrast to being an architect, which I enjoyed very much studying architecture, at the same time I was studying architecture, I had already previously started to study ceramics, so I did them sort of concurrently with architecture as my focus, but I continued to do pottery. And then when I entered the workforce, or however you want to say it, and I was an architect, I continued to do pottery on the side as a hobby, and then I segued into the clothing business, and I continued to do pottery on the side. And in the context of architecture, I was able to do things like furniture design and small-scale stuff like hand railings, where I would really concentrate on them as an object and, try to make them interesting and meaningful and sculptural, or whatever words you want to use. And then in the sort of context of clothing, I was able to do graphic design and product design and accessories and all these different things. But somehow none of them ever really mattered to me or touched me in the way that working with clay did and making pots did. And so I sort of, started having this more regular nagging thing of, you should not be doing anything other than making pots. This is the right thing. This is what feels right. The work that's coming out is much better than any of the other, architecture or product or anything else you're doing. What feels right is two things. It physically feels right, but the result feels right. The result feels like I'm making something that is somehow a part of me that, again, not to be too corny, but if you try to find your way of self-expression, where your voice, whatever you want to call it, comes through and people read it, and somehow, people will buy something from me or get it or whatever, and say things like, I feel like I know you a little bit from this, or, I'm so happy to come see the studio. I've had your work, and now I feel like I really, the connection is really there. Or, I do feel like any architecture I did or whatever, maybe it was groovy and nice and fine, but it was not, it didn't express any sort of interesting, meaningful thing aesthetically or intellectually or whatever. So yeah, I think it feels right in terms of the process of doing it, and it feels right in terms of the resulting product, or whatever you want to call it, the thing that comes out. So there's a little pot for you. I guess pottery specifically, as a sub-art, or whatever you want to call it, is a universal language like any art is. If you're a painter and you draw well or paint well, you can go to Africa and squeeze some berries and pick up a stick and make some art that will connect you to the people there who are paying attention, either other artists or people who care about drawing or art or technique or whatever. It's the same with ceramics. There's a ceramic tradition in basically every country in the world, and I can go to other countries and communicate with people. When I worked in Japan, I was working in a studio where no one spoke English, and there were some times where I had to go get the translator to get me out of a pickle, but there were plenty of days where it was just a lot of nodding and smiling and bowing and umming and eyeing and, pointing at this thing or that thing. Or, I'd put some pots out in the sun, and they would come and say, gesture that the sun is too strong right now, bring them back in and take them out later, and stuff like that, which is great. It is. But, I think that that's any art, or even, like math. If you're a mathematician, you can go anywhere and do math with people and communicate. So it's just another language, which is great and is like a passport to go places and be part of a, global subculture or whatever, which I love, which is really nice. Well, I mean, I think that that although it is that what I do is craft, clay based, therefore craft based. I think any really good art that I respond to always has an element of high craftsmanship to it. I mean, if you look at Paul Klee's paintings, or even like Monet's water lilies, I mean, those are staggeringly well executed craftsmanship, draftsmanship, design, and then there's meaning that you can subscribe or not, and you can enjoy or not enjoy. I mean, for me, looking at every time I look at one of those water lily paintings in real life, whether it's at MoMA in New York or I was just in Basel and saw one, it takes my breath away. It's a totally physical experience and reaction, which I love. That's that you don't get from craft alone. And so while I do still sometimes make cups and bowls, and I'm not trying to take anyone's breath away with those. I'm trying to give them a more interesting cup of tea or coffee in terms of the experience, and I think that's valid. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Whether there's a hierarchy of between craft and fine art, or craft and design, or design and fine art. I mean, at the end of the day, you kind of have to step outside of that conversation, or you'll drive yourself crazy. I mean, first of all, the stuff that I do that I've done officially in the art context of the art world, stuff that's in museums and galleries. I mean, first, to step back one more step, everything that I make is abstract. I mean, there's no narrative, there's no imagery, and there are no titles. So, it's up to the viewer in a way to project the meaning, like any sort of good abstract art. Sometimes you give it a title as a clue, or you give it a title that's heavy-handed, and then it has all the meaning. We're making, like I said before, that piece at Montalvo that's 195 cones. It's 195 cones that are about that big, 2 feet tall, and then there's 10 different cut lines. So each one is cut in half at some, they go every 2 inches, so 2 inches from the top 4 all the way down. So what you wind up with is 2 pieces, one of which is a top and one of which is a bottom, and they're different heights. So, some people look at that and say, all right, so there's 195 bombs, there's 195 phalluses that you're castrating. I mean, a cone shape can be anything. It can be a breast, it can be nothing, it can be a cone, it can be a purely geometrical form that has no meaning whatsoever. We made it as a purely geometrical form with no meaning. The fact that we're in 2 wars right now, a lot of people are going to look at that and say, okay, so here are 195 bombs or bullets that are either being commissioned or decommissioned. So does that mean that we're pro-war or anti-war? There's none of that in the piece in terms of intention, but it's all in the piece in terms of how people want to read it. So that, to me, is the beauty of abstract art, is that you can read it how you want to read it. What these pots are at the end of the day is essentially a formal record of the process that they go through in terms of their making. So it's wheel thrown, like I did before. The circular nature of it is a direct result of it spinning on the wheel. The glaze, I use some different chemicals in the glazes to cause bubbling and in the kiln when it's firing, and then as it cools, it traps the bubbles in the glaze, and then I grind after it comes out of the kiln. I grind the top layer of the bubbles off, so what you're seeing is the back of the bubbles in the glaze, and oftentimes I'll reglaze it and refire it and grind it again. So what the pot becomes is essentially, in this case, a record of the materials and the methods used in making it. And so a lot of these pots are the similar process. This pot is made in a kiln that uses wood ash in the firing. There's actually no glaze on it. It's all scars from the process. And in the case of this one, it's fired on its side in a pile of wood ash. It sits like this. And then when the kiln is peaking in temperature, we blow wood ash into it and it rains down on top of it. And then in some cases it melts completely and becomes long drips of
it turns into glaze. It's the ash melting. In some cases, it stays dry, and there's it looks like ash, and then the ash that it's sitting in is smothering and fighting to burn, and it scars the pot. So what you really get is just a series of scars on the pot based on the process of the firing and the materials used in the firing, which I love. I mean, the fact that it's just expressing how it's made. So in terms of Nader, the architect who I'm collaborating with on the Montalvo project, he builds buildings, they don't look anything like this, but his fundamental interests are in the materials and the methods employed in making those materials into a building. So we have similar interests and concerns in that respect. And that comes from, I think, we both went to RISD together at the same time 20 years ago. So our education is the same. And I think that obviously influenced what we think about and care about now. So I love his work. And when Julie asked if there was somebody that I wanted to collaborate with for the Montalvo project, he's the first and only person I thought of. So it's the first time that we've done anything together. It's been a year making the project. And it's been a great process, and the result is absolutely something neither one of us would have ever done alone, which is great, which is the benefit and what you hope to get out of a collaboration.